Welcome to Stitchery Stories, where textile artists share their life in fabric and thread, inspiration, techniques, disasters and delights. And I'm Susan Weeks, enthusiastic embroiderer and textile art dabbler who also loves podcasting. So take a break and enjoy our light-hearted chat, and please share with your friends so they can enjoy it too.
Hello, hello. Announcing Stitchery Courses, a brilliant new place to easily find experts who teach classes and courses in all things using thread, fabric and yarn. Covering mostly topics around embroidery and textile art at the moment, but this list will keep growing as I extend the reach and grow Stitchery Courses. Simply visit stitcherycourses.com and browse or search the fabulous teachers who are already listed. Check out their profile and information. It's easy to message them on the platform or click through to their website and you book and buy a class or a course or a workshop directly with them. You can also keep up to date with info and offers from all the experts through the newsletter, and also watch out for that fabulous supplier guide, which is coming soon. And if you teach your art, craft or skills with thread, fabric and yarn, then don't miss out and come and get listed on Stitchery Courses and attract new people into your business. stitcherycourses.com. I'll see you over there. Hello and welcome today to our lovely guest, Elnaz Yazdani. Hi, Elnaz.
Hi, Sue.
Brilliant to speak to you today. And yes, we've had this booked in a while, haven't we, Elnaz? We were really organised with ourselves. So the day has rolled around and here we are. So I'm excited to chat with Elnaz. I last bumped into her at I think it was the Harrogate Knitting and Stitching Show, wasn't it, last year when we bumped into each other and had a chat there. So that was lovely. Right. Anyway, so Elnaz has got loads of really interesting things to share with us. So let's get on with who Elnaz is. Elnaz Yazdani is an embroidery artist and educator and has taught embroidery throughout her community within primary, secondary and higher education, as well as community groups and organisations. In 2020, Elnaz was commended for the Teaching Excellence Award in Embroidery via the Embroiderers Guild and became an Embroiderers Guild Scholar after the successful launch of her virtual embroidery school called Embroider Your Future. Her practice explores ways of transforming traditional embroidery techniques through her choice of unusual materials. And there are some really unusual ones coming up, folks. She is inspired by industrial upcycled materials and the ways in which she can embellish and connect or transform these items through stitch to develop a surface or form. Her unique embroidery style has allowed her to work across fashion, jewellery and installation contexts since graduating from Manchester School of Art in 2014. And Elnaz is available for workshops, talks, embroidery and jewellery commissions, exhibitions and collaborative projects. And as ever, we can find all about Elnaz and some of her images on her episode on stitcherystories.com. And so out of all your different links, Elnaz, what's the best place where people can find you?
I'd say possibly Instagram's the best. Just at Elnaz Yazdani and my website.
Yeah, follow Elnaz on Instagram, and obviously we'll be posting stuff on there too. Right, that is enough from me. So, Elnaz, in true Stitchery Stories form, before we get started too far in your story, would you like to share with us what you're working on and what's got you excited, Elnaz?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Sue. Yeah, I'm working on quite a lot at the minute, but at the moment I'm currently surrounded by lots of little patchwork pieces of aerial views that people have done. I'm working on a project in South Leeds, which is called Creative Communities Pride and Place. So we're trying to get people to represent their area and where they're from in South Leeds through creativity.
Right.
And so I've been working a lot with aerial views using different found objects and materials to create these sort of intricate worlds. It's very, very true to my style of embroidery that you'll see, but we've made these beautiful mini little aerial views, and so they're all over my studio at the minute, and I'm going to be patchworking them together for the show opening next week.
Lovely. And are they all going to be put together in like a kind of a quilt format, all sewn together in one big hanging sort of thing?
Yeah, I was really trying to think about how it could all go together in the end, because when you do these projects, you get so many people that take part, and you're seeing them all in isolation. But then I've had them all dropped off, and when you see it all together, that it gets you really excited, because then you're like, oh gosh, well, am I going to display them in hoops? Am I going to patchwork them? But I've decided to patchwork them together and do a 3D hanging, because it's got a lot of depth to it. Some people have gone really three-dimensional with them. But as you patchwork them all together as well, even though they're all done in the same area, they all look slightly different. But it's almost like adding the maps together. You kind of, I don't know, you're just creating a whole new abstract world. That's what's got me excited at the minute.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing it all come together.
Have people done the same image, or have they all had a section of map that's supposed to all fit together, or has it not worked has it been done differently?
Well, again, when you work in the community, you can start with a brief and people really go off in different directions.
That's what I was wondering.
I've given them different aerial views and maps, some Google image based and some just kind of almost like audience survey map type things. But, you had one woman that zoomed right in and was like, that's my garden. I'm going to do an aerial view of my garden. And I thought, okay, we were playing with scale here now, and we're playing with materials. There's a lot going on. So yeah, it's going to be a lot less of a visual representation where roads meet roads and more of an exploration of the theme of pride and place. And I think because place means something different to every person, doesn't it? For one guy, it was really important he gets the local pub in, the church, all the places that he goes to.
Important places to him on his daily kind of life, And then we've got the woman's garden. And I can imagine that was really fascinating, actually, with people telling you about why they'd picked that thing. And
yeah, it was a real conversation starter. And you would, and I think because also then with my style of embroidery, they weren't just using thread and fabric, they were using thread, fabric, and unusual materials that I'd collected for them I tried to kind of source as much from around the local area as well. There was a local scrap store that I got in touch with to source stuff for them. So you had people really interested in the objects they were using and why they were using them.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was, I'm going to use these little computer parts as high-rise buildings, or I'm going to use these nuts and bolts to represent a cluster of trees or a cluster of industrial buildings or something. But they were really thinking about why they were using and how that might represent the little bit of the map. So that was quite cool.
Brilliant. And were these, did you have a specific age range, or were they people from a particular area, or was it people who were at all creative and this was having a go at stitch, or what was the profile of the group, I suppose? Because that'll have been a challenge, no doubt.
So the funding was through lottery funding, and I was working with Swarthmore. Swarthmore are based in Leeds. Good to give them a plug. You should check them out. So they're part of the project, and they were mainly working with adults in South Leeds.
Right.
And to be honest, a lot of them were getting involved because they hadn't necessarily been creative before. So new people to embroidery as a practice, but also creativity.
Oh, how lovely.
So it's really interesting project.
Yeah.
And I think, it was managed by a lovely lady called Penny, who just did such a great job at like going out and really chatting to people, finding out what they're interested in and what pride and place means to them. So that's why the project's kind of.
And I think, as you're saying, they're using like bits of computers or stuff from the scrap store, etc. In a lot of ways, it gives people a starting point, doesn't it? Because you can look at some of these things and think, oh, I could use it to do X, Y, and Z. Whereas, again, if people haven't had a background in making things, creativity, starting from nothing's like just impossible, really. It's too overwhelming, isn't it? But I think when you've got a diverse range of things that different people can visualize, it's like a shortcut for them.
Completely. And I also think there's something about stitch, this is some of the feedback that we got, was that, when people are faced with sort of canvas and paints, it's quite permanent, isn't it? Whereas stitch, you can unpick it. And so we had a lot of, and even though I don't always encourage that, because I think your mistakes are what you learn from, there was something to a beginner about the fact that, well, I can unpick this if it doesn't go right. So it's not the end of the world. And that was really, that's always been something I've found working in the community in general with every project I do, is that embroidery and stitch is really accessible for that. I think kind of giving people the confidence to just have a go. Because I'm always faced with people that say, oh, it's almost like they've got a bit of imposter syndrome, or this isn't for me, or I can't do this. But once they've got the needle and thread, they're like, oh, I think I'm an embroiderer now.
Yeah, and you get that comment, don't you, of I can't draw. Well, that's got nothing to do with what we're doing here. Put that one aside straight away, exactly. Kind of thing. It doesn't matter. We're not here to draw. Yeah, it's like,
exactly.
Oh, that sounds a really fascinating project. And you do get involved in a lot of these kind of projects, don't you, Elnaz?
Yeah. I'm predominantly, as you said in the bio, I'm a community-based artist now. It's what my MA was on. So my MA was titled Rethinking Embroidery, Connecting, Embellishing and Transforming Communities Through Embroidery Education. So it was all about trying to find ways to connect people through stitch, embellish their lives, transform them in some way so that they could have a new outlet that would generally improve their well-being. So I was almost looking at embroidery as a form of like social prescribing on that. So it's kind of led to me working in lots of different community projects. So I'm doing the one I mentioned, but I'm also working with the Harewood Biennial and the British Textile Biennial this year at the moment.
Oh, right.
And I'm working with artists Alice Kettle and Rabia Sharif over in Hare Hills. And we're creating these beautiful embroidered panels with community South Asian women's groups across Hare Hills. And they're going to go on an exhibit at Harewood House.
Right.
From the 27th of July, actually. The exhibition's called Create Elevate, and the work that we've produced is called Common Threads.
Right.
So it's nice. It's been a nice way of collaborating with other artists as well who've worked in community arts, as someone like Alice Kettle, for example, who's done this for years and years. To have collaborated with the women's groups that I've worked with for many years, and giving them a little bit more elevation in the stuff that they've done and taken part in. I think it's going to be, I'm really excited about that as well, actually. But I also work for Stitch Up CIC, which is a community interest company, and I do a lot of community work there. Yeah, and lots of different kind of things here and there that I'll pick up when I can, and I can't keep track sometimes. But
I know.
It's always a juggling act with this way of working.
Well, that's right. It is the real definition of a portfolio career that people refer to. But do you know what always strikes me? And obviously I'm in East Yorkshire, so I'm 50, how far am I? I'm 50, 60 miles away from you, but it takes quite a while for me to trundle through the lanes to get over to Leeds. But it always strikes me when I'm speaking to anybody working in textiles and around West Yorkshire, Leeds, that kind of metropolis, there's so many things like that on the go. That's what it seems to me. There's loads of these opportunities. There's loads of these really interesting community projects. I live in a little seaside town, and Holderness, the area of East Yorkshire, is a very rural area, and everyone's like scattered around. I suppose there might be things like that going on in Hull, which is only like 20 miles away, but feels as if it's quite a long way away. And I just never really hear of those kind of things, but I seem to hear about all the things that's going on in in West Yorkshire, or West Riding, as we would refer to it. Seems so vibrant.
I think it's probably because of the textile history of the area, and the heritage. I think there's been a lot more funding lately that's gone in through Arts Council and lottery funded projects that really do explore sort of heritage and place. And I think if you think about like Dewsbury, Backley, West Yorkshire, Leeds, even actually if you go over to Burnley, Blackburn, heading more to the kind of British Textile Biennial area, Lancashire way, we've got a lot of textile history across those regions. So I think, a lot of the projects I've taken part in do kind of tap into or touch upon the heritage of the area.
Do you know what? I think you've got a really good point there, Elnaz, thinking about it. Yeah, and when people are have got these pots of money to hand out, then it probably seems like an obvious place. And I think it also connects there's different, more diverse communities. As you say, you've been working with a lot of like women's groups and things like that. You've got also places, a lot of the mill buildings, if they've survived, are now like community-based places as well. So, yeah. And what's the Kirklees one?
Oh, the woven in Kirklees.
Yeah. So that sounds like a similar thing as well.
Yeah, because so Woven in Kirklees I worked for last year, and they're another textile biennial festival, but they're council funded actually, and they have different pots of funding as well from different projects. But yeah, similar in the sense that British Textile Biennial, it's a celebration every 2 years of that kind of heritage, the future industry as well, that showcasing that textiles hasn't just gone away.
It's not died, yeah.
It's not died. There's quite a lot of stuff still going on, and a lot for communities to get involved in and learn from. So I've always been involved with these projects as an artist, as a freelancer. But before that, as you said in my bio, I've just stitched for as long as I can remember. I love stitch.
So that really sort of leads into, therefore, how you got interested in embroidery and textile art anyway. And then I think I want to move into your interesting materials, let's call it that. So let's start with how you got going with all of this, Elnaz.
Yeah, so I'd say it's probably in my blood.
Right.
So I'm half Iranian and I'm half English, and my mum is from Lancaster way, so Lancashire way.
Oh, right. So half Iranian and half Lancashire.
Half Lancastrian and half, And
marvellous.
I know, it's an interesting mix. And I think I never got to meet my grandparents fully, like properly, because they passed when I was young.
Right.
But my grandma on my mum's side was a dressmaker, and engaged with dressmaking quite a lot. I found one of her books, little award books, actually, the other week. Yeah. And my granddad on my dad's side in Iran, he owned a fabric shop in Iran, and I've seen some pictures of my dad sat amongst all the fabrics as a kid. So I think I had like a textile interest from both sides of my heritage, but then also just so being exposed to that and the culture, and we visited Iran as a child.
I was going to say, because Iran's just such a nightmare to even think about visiting. So I was just thinking, shall I ask her if she's been to Iran? So I'm glad you said. So you went as a child. Wow.
Yeah, we went as a child, as a family. And so I've seen, I obviously would love to go as a woman, but it's not appropriate for me to go right now.
Don't go now, no.
But so I guess I've kind of mainly had a bit of subtle input maybe from the textile heritage from both areas. But also when I was growing up, I'm dyslexic. I was always really drawn to materials and art in general. It was just where I felt most happy and where I felt I had more talent.
Yeah.
And we could express myself better. So I had some really good teachers like Miss Kershaw and Miss Eves, who were really wonderful at kind of fighting the corner for the arts at that age, GCSE A level, and getting me to university. And I studied at Manchester School of Arts with some great artists. I was taught by great artists there, that really inspired my love for specifically embroidery, and also seeing embroidery as something different. So I always loved textiles, but I think I always thought I had kind of preconceived notions about what embroidery was, but actually it can be a lot of different things. And as you'll see by my work, it's not exactly traditional.
No. I think it's really great, though, that you had those inspiring teachers, as you say, fighting your corner, because in so many places, the textile element has like been almost eradicated, hasn't it? And it gets kind of lost. And so, I think it's always really great when you've got those inspiring teachers. And I really love it. I think we talked about it when we bumped into each other at Knitting and Stitching show in November, when I was volunteering. I love it when all the school groups come around, do you know what I mean? And so I love listening to the conversations, and just absolutely ace for a start off. And then you get the teachers who possibly don't understand some of the traditional styles of things. So you can kind of hear them trying to explain to these kids what these things are, but you kind of stood there going, I don't really know what that is.
Yeah.
But there was a group of kids there, and they just blew me away because I started talking to them, and I said, "Oh, what, are you taking pictures?" So they all had their phones out. So they started talking. I got them talking, and it was brilliant. And then one of them turned around and said, "This is like a real life massive Pinterest board."
Yeah.
It's like, yes. It really is. There is like, but it was just so funny that they'd related. It was the embroidery through the ages exhibition, and then they'd like equated that the way they could express it was like a massive real life Pinterest board. So,
Yeah.
it was so lovely. So yeah, I could tell that those teachers have passed that inspiration on to you, and you're like heavily involved in education yourself. So I can see
Mm.
that having gone round in a big circle as well. So
Yeah, and I'm really trying to be that person for young people, because I
yeah,
think people always say, "Well, what's your practice? What do you do?" And I think I'm most passionate about keeping the craft alive, to be
yeah.
honest, and passing that on to other people. Like, it's less about what I produce and how many exhibitions I've done. I wouldn't say I'm an artist that's sort of focusing on that side of things or always striving for the next big exhibition, but it's actually more about what's the next project, either community or education project, that I can have an impact to share these skills, because at the end of the day, it's the next generation. I've got to keep it alive.
I love that. I really do love that. And I suppose in that respect, it's one of those like accidents of geography, really, in that you are, as I say, in that area where it is possible to be so involved in community projects. If you're stuck here in Hornsey, I think it'd be more of a challenge and you'd have to be driving lots of places. You couldn't really do that career in lots of places. So it's that combination of geography and opportunity, et cetera,
Yeah.
where, where you are, you've got access there to lots of these really interesting projects.
I think I'd probably just start one up anyway. I think if it didn't exist, I'd be like, okay, well, it clearly needs it in this town. I'd probably just set something up and hope for the best.
You are so right, Elnaz. Yeah, that's it. What a brilliant attitude. Well, if there ain't one there, I'm going to damn well set it up myself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I've been there with other things.
Yeah.
So obviously your teachers and family history there has been a lot of inspirations. Let's mix up inspirations and techniques and materials and talk to us about this idea of kind of rethinking embroidery with different materials and how the materials inspire you and inspire others.
A huge inspiration is the unusual materials.
Yeah.
But when I mean unusual materials, I'm kind of thinking about basically anything that is an addition to thread and fabric. And sometimes my work doesn't even have a ground either. So sometimes it's very three-dimensional, that I'll be stitching to other objects so that it's almost a three-dimensional thing. Like I've mentioned at the beginning, I've done jewellery and sculpture as well as flat.
Making forms then of connecting these things, yeah.
Yeah. So I'd say the major inspiration in terms of technique, is where it's all started, would have had to have been gold work, to be honest. I was self-taught gold work, and I was an embroidery technician for 7 years at the University of Huddersfield. So I had an amazing job share called Melissa Fletcher, and she was wonderful at gold work. We worked together alongside each other for 7 years, and we did a lot of different learning gold work techniques, and she taught me quite a few different ones as well. But I think one of the things that I was most inspired by learning the tradition was then exploring and kind of experimenting with those objects in different forms. So, for example, the bullion thread, the kind of thread that you get that's like a spring. It's a wire.
Yeah.
And the structure of that, the spring-like structure, I thought, this is genius. You can stitch through it. It's basically just a spring, and it's flexible and it's malleable. And I guess provided that 3D allure that people love about gold work. And so I learned it traditionally, had a go at it traditionally, but then I immediately started to think, right, well, what else could I use?
What can I do with it?
Yeah. And that was happening at university as well, but I did more beadwork technique, basic embellishment stuff, played around with different things here and there, sticking stuff through on the machines, getting told off by technicians for getting stuff stuck to the machines. So it started with gold work, and it sort of went off with me just trying to source different types of multiples that I could sort of work with. So I spent quite a bit of time thinking about. I don't just source for the sake of sourcing, because I think that's a bit dangerous. You can often end up a bit of a hoarder.
Yeah.
Whenever I had a project,
Get it used up.
yeah, to sort of think about, well, why am I buying this? What is what are the colours? What do the forms say that represent the project that I'm working with, or the theme? So that I'm always buying with purpose,
Right.
or receiving donations with purpose that then end up with me being able to use them in a way that with the techniques that I've got in mind. So I think that's one key thing. If people do want to do this kind of work, is don't just source everything, because you will just end up with a bit of a mess on a bit of
It's not just any old junk, is it?
No,
I mean,
it's not.
that sounds a bit dismissive, and I just kind of do it as a bit of a joke. But
Yeah.
And so before we go much further, there's some images that Elnaz has shared with me, and one of them, talking of gold work. So I was just like, saving the images in the right folder, and I'd written, I think it had come through with some random like JPEG name on it. So I'd I'd written sparkly gold work. And then I'd looked at it properly and I went, oh, it's loads of nails, actually. Oh my God. So this image, it looks like a caterpillar made out of nails. Is a really bad example, but I'm just trying to paint a picture here with words through audio. It's like a sparkly caterpillar made out of nails, and good old loom bands have made an appearance in one of them. And I just love looking at work like that, because I do like to think, oh, yeah, that's so-and-so, or those, oh, that's an interesting way of using those objects. Oh, I wonder what the hell that is, kind of thing. So I love all that, Elnaz. But yeah, I'm glad you said that. There's that fine line between collecting loads of stuff and hoarding it all forever.
Exactly, yeah. And you've got to be so careful, because otherwise you just end up with no space. I mean, I'm already in the studio. My studio is just in a room in my house, spare room in my house, and yeah, it's just like IKEA Kallax boxes full of boxes of stuff. It's organised and it's got a purpose.
Yeah.
But yeah, and obviously I try to use renewable materials as well where I can. So I'll be collecting bits of like the things that come off the cans. I like those.
Yeah.
Tags and netting and from your fruit and veg and stuff like that. But the more I make changes in my life to kind of use less plastics or do some things in a different way, the less waste I've got to work for embroidery stuff. So I'm sourcing materials all the time in new ways.
Yeah. I think these scrap stores are a real good idea. Again, I think there is one in Hull. But I have no real need to go driving off to go. I don't need anything like that at the moment. Do you know what I mean? The stuff I'm doing, I've got here. I've got that. I've got stuff to use up. So I'm not going to go, as I say, go off getting stuff for the sake of it. But I do I wear contact lenses as well. So in the disposable ones. So not every day, because I use it usually for sport more than anything else. But every time I put my contact lenses in, then there's 2 plastic little tubs and 2 foil. So I carefully peel the foil off. And then I do look at these things thinking, what I could actually, because they very quickly mount up. What can I do with these? So at some point, I haven't been collecting them. They go, separated and go in the recycling. But I've still got in mind somehow, somewhere, I'm sure I could do something with that bit of waste that I generate with the contact lens tubs.
That's such a good idea as well, because I mean there's so many people will work in different professions where they might end up with the multiples of the same waste. I know my mum's a midwife, but she's in nursing and midwifery. I don't know what the little bit, once you've administered something or given someone, you end up with these little plastic pots and tops and ends you've got to get rid of. Obviously it's all hygienic, but there's a whole project in that you could kind of come up with through sourcing materials.
And so is there any particular materials that you really love, is your kind of go-to thing, or do you make a conscious effort to expand your material repertoire?
I try to make a conscious effort to change it up every now and again. It's always seeing what's available, what's new, rather than kind of trying to seek out and source the same thing all the time. But I do love working with like little washers and little kind of plumbing parts and things like that. I quite enjoy working with car like manufacturing place near where I'm from, and I go in and the guy lets me fill up a bag for a £5, and I think he's always like, what's she going to do with all this?
What is she doing with all this?
Little odds and ends and bits. But I just love the way that it works with stitch, and I think it's usually stuff that I'm thinking that'll work really well as I'm couching, or that'll work really well as I'm passing the thread through. And you've got to always look for the potential before you source and think, well, how can I apply that?
What exactly am I going to do with it all? Yeah. Fabulous. In terms of techniques then, so you mentioned, obviously you started off with, you've learned traditional gold work, you mentioned things like couching. Is there any specific technique that you favour above all else, or and what sort of techniques do you include with some of your community work, or is that very much put your needle up, across and back down again and make a stitch?
So with community work, I try to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
It depends on the group, but a lot of couching with communities. A lot of running stitches over things, or whipped running stitch, threaded back stitch. So things that you can kind of whip through or pass through. Simple beadwork as well. I do a lot with communities. But favourite technique for me would probably be cut work in gold work, where you can kind of cut up again that bullion or that check wire and work with it in so many different ways to create 3D structure, but also you can work with it in multiples to create kind of different surfaces and stuff. And you can apply that cut work technique to pretty much anything. So you've got a bag of straws or you've got a bag of bullion wire, you can do the similar sort of thing. And I think that's probably my favourite hand-based technique. Yeah.
And so it's always a bit of a challenge when you are busy with community projects, etc. And you've already said you're not greatly into creating stuff for exhibitions, etc. But where does your creativity fit into all of this, Elnaz? Because sometimes it can be easy for our own creativity to get like pushed to one side or forgotten about because we're that busy doing all these other things. Do you find that to be an ongoing battle?
At first, I think that's kind of ingrained into you at art school. It's like, don't lose your practice, and make sure you're not giving too much away and all this. But again, it just doesn't sit in my nature to be like that. And I'm just very I am a giving person.
Yeah.
And I like working with communities. And I think for me, it's more about process than it is outcome.
Right.
And although my creative style has formed and is what it is in terms of kind of the hand stitch based artist that explores experimental approaches and exploiting techniques like gold work. But my inspirations in terms of kind of creating these mini worlds, if you will. So a lot of my large scale pieces, they're kind of, I call them magnetic world or magnificent world or mundane world. And they're all different pieces that I've almost used to explore my own mental well-being and my mental health. But also it's my way of kind of creating imaginary worlds that I can get lost within. I think I wrote about it a little bit on textileartist.org in more depth if anyone wants to go and have a read. But I think from that, they can relate a lot to that way of working, which is really interesting. And I think knowing that can kind of give other people something to relate to and explore their own mental health and well-being journey through stitch. I'd rather be putting the time and energy into that, if you will, than creating more work for the sake of it. But if I got a commission, then of course I would do it for people. But when I get time for myself, I try to just sit down with my materials and kind of just check in with myself and create my own. I'm always creating samples. I'm always still making samples, making art, and I've got boxes of what I call teaching resources and teaching samples. But it's not to say that one or two of those ideas might not go into a new project at some point. So I try not to lose myself, but I try not to get sort of caught up in that too much, because I think that can send artists down an unproductive spiral, actually, because your inspiration might come from being out and working in the community or working with young people.
It could be just like the spark of a comment, can't it? Like an offhand, like that lad with his comment about it's like a giant Pinterest board. People can say something and your brain, off it goes. A new train of thought, a new set of inspirations. I don't think just sitting around in a room in a corner, it does us any good in anything, really. Sometimes, yes, it's nice to retreat. I'm a massive introvert, but it is nice to get out and about, spark off other people for sure. So you've got loads of samples and things. I don't suppose you have like unfinished objects then, do you? Your work's not that kind of work, although you've got a massive store of lovely samples. So what do you do with all of those? Are they just getting hoarded as well?
So my UFOs will be my samples that I've maybe started in teaching or started when I'm kind of sat around having a go at stuff. But it's gone back to my nature. I like to give back. So I'll just, if I've done a community project with a lovely group and my 6 weeks or my 5 weeks has come to an end, and I've got like loads of samples, I'd like to leave them with the community as sort of reference points.
Yeah, lovely.
Or creating archives. So, I've taken part in projects like Textile at the Whitworth Art Gallery, where there's a teaching resource of mine in their stores there. I've done the same with Gawthorpe Hall, where I've left samples and teaching resources there. And I think it's good to give back to that legacy. And I think, if in time, if my work, my bigger piece in my work, I'd want them to be donated to some sort of exhibition or some sort of permanently housed archive like other textile artists have had, so that they're given back and not just in a box somewhere and not being looked at
in the loft. And
I try to get them out. I left stuff at the university when I was there as well. I think I try to get them out for every new project, reassess, have a look, what samples are important, what am I not getting much use out of, what could I give to an organisation or the place that I've worked at and leave there. And I think that's really important again, because what good is it giving someone if it's just sat in a box?
Yeah. Oh, I love that attitude. That's really great. You mentioned there about having stuff at the Gawthorpe Hall. So for anybody listening who doesn't know, so that's a major textile collection, isn't it? In heading off towards Lancashire somewhere, isn't it? Can't remember exactly where, but it's in the north of England, and it's a major place with a really fabulous textile collection. So I like the contrast there between you doing things there. So what sort of things have you done at Gawthorpe? Because it's obviously a lot of historic, beautiful, intricate embroidery, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I took part in an exhibition there in 2019 before the pandemic.
Seems a lifetime ago now.
I know, I'd almost forgotten. And it was called Strands of Place and Time. And we had to go and have a look at the collection. So it was the Rachel K. Shuttleworth collection of textiles. And I picked one. I was immediately drawn to an 18th century piece of gold work, as I would be. And it was a bodice, but it was an 18th century piece of gold work from Persia. So Iranian kind of culture again.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I managed to link it to talking to my dad about his story of coming over to the UK. I ended up linking it. He spent a lot of time in the Merchant Navy as an engineer on ships. So I was kind of thinking about engine rooms and engines and cogs and parts.
Pipes
and things, and ended up creating this collection of embroidery and jewellery for exhibit there. And then I taught a course about traditional gold work through to experimental during the course of the exhibition. So that's how I ended up doing some teaching and some sampling there as well.
Oh, how fascinating. But how lovely though that, as you say, you've left a resource there, which is a brilliant contrast to, as you say, the very traditional historic collection of gold work and other fine embroidery. So that must make you feel really chuffed.
I hope so. I don't know where it is or how it kind of how they keep or archive stuff that they've done with artists and other projects there. But I do recommend if anyone can ever go or get there. They've always got a lovely selection of stuff pulled out on display, don't they?
I went ages and ages ago, but it's like I really do need to go back and spend some more time there because it was just really fascinating. So, and so then really, Elnaz, looking forward, so you've always got these community projects. So what have you got in the pipeline that you can share with us, that we can keep our eye open for you?
So I've got as I said at the beginning, I've got quite a few things coming up.
Yeah.
One to look out would be the Common Threads exhibition at Harewood House.
That was it, yeah.
That'll be open to the public from the 28th of June. It's in collaboration with Alice Kettle and Rabia Sharif at the British Textile Biennial. And it'll be really beautiful. The panels are gorgeous. They were started in Karachi with Alice Kettle, and then they were sent over to us to work with these lovely South Asian women's groups over in Hare Hill. The work that's happening is beautiful. That it's all collaborate. We're filling in bits that are kind of missing in these panels.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts in there, and it's almost quite folky. It's lovely, and you can see the little influences by each of us that have taken part in leading the project. But it's very much the ladies' work and the community's work. It's wonderful. I'm just started taking part in a project with the Crafts Council, actually, called Material World. It's actually a creative professional development project for primary school educators. So if anybody works in primary education, they should check this project out on the Crafts Council's website.
Yeah.
And you can get involved by submitting artwork that you produce with your primary education class. I'm basically working with teachers across Kirklees and Blackburn to help them initiate what they call a make first approach, which is about them thinking less about the outcome, more about the process, and getting their young people to essentially just make first.
Start making something, rather than worrying about what it's going to look like at the end.
Exactly. And you can take part in this project, and the Crafts Council are submitting awards to different primary schools that take part. And I think it's a national project, so anyone can take part. We've just got funding as artists to work with these kind of key areas to help them with their submission and stuff. So I've been starting on that one. And I'd say that's kind of it for the coming 2 months. But I kind of have to work like that.
That sounds like a year's worth of work already.
Exactly. But the Crafts Council project, as I said, it will last until kind of next year with submissions.
Oh, well, that's going to keep you out of mischief, isn't it? And then these different kind of projects and community work, how far in advance are they known about? Or is it all like, oh, right, in 3 weeks' time, it's going to start? How that must be a real juggling act.
It is a real juggling act. It's really varied, to be honest.
Yeah.
Obviously, also working with Stitch Up, the CIC I mentioned at the start.
Yes.
The project I'm involved with there is lottery funded for 3 years. So I'll be working there for 3 years on that project as a sort of ongoing thing. But then you've got other projects that spring out of nowhere and they're suddenly like, we're doing this and we need you to be involved, and it's for 6 weeks, and you're like, oh, okay. It's a real mix. I always say to anyone who wants to work this way, always have something that my mum would have called my bread and butter role.
Yeah.
And then fill in with the other work as and when you can. And I am quite strict with my time in sort of saying, well, I work for this organisation on these days, and then I'm freelance on this day and this day. So if you want me, a bit of flexibility to work to my time as well. You can. I think I've learned a lot over the last few years is you can very quickly get burnout if you say yes to too much, and then suddenly you're like, I've got too many projects on. So it's all about managing your creative time and your expectations, and actually organisations will value that better and value you and your time better, and they will work around freelancers because they're used to working that way.
Yeah, it's like anything, isn't it? It's respecting people's boundaries, and if you don't have your own boundaries, then you can't complain when everything collapses around you, or you feel like you've been taken advantage of. It's all your own fault because you haven't put those boundaries in place. And when the boundaries are in place, as you say, people respect those. It's no biggie, is it? It's no big issue.
No.
That's how we have to work. So, I'm glad you brought that in towards the end, because the creative time element can be a real challenge. And that's why I was wondering about how long these projects last for and how they crop up. But having that 3-year continuity must feel quite like relieving, I suppose, as well in the background. You think, I've got that for 3 years. Yeah, phew.
And also it's like taking part in projects that you actually want to take part in as well. Like if something doesn't feel right, you can say no. And I've had that a lot where you've got emails come through and something's not quite felt right, whether it's you feel like they're not valuing you enough or your time, or it just doesn't sound right. In your gut when something doesn't feel right. So don't be afraid to say no as well. And just take on the things you want to do.
Yeah. What two really great pieces of advice there from somebody who's been juggling all of these projects very successfully. But yeah, in anything, if we want to follow our dreams, follow our goals, we can say yes to those, but the important thing is saying no to all the rest of the stuff that'll just divert you away from what you want to achieve. So yeah. Well, do you know, Elnaz, it's been really, really great speaking with you, and really fascinating finding out how you've been juggling all of these things, and you know, the way in which you're rethinking embroidery, to use that term again, and the fascinating use of material. So everybody, make sure that you follow Elnaz on Instagram. There will be some of her images, I say, on her issue of Stitchery Stories, and I think that's about it, really. Yeah, we'll keep fascinated with all of your different projects that you're juggling away with, Elnaz. And thank you so much for your time today and sharing all of your lovely stories.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks for listening.
Oh, it's been absolutely brilliant. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, then please join the Stitchery Stories fan club so you can get an email when a new episode is released. It's a quick and easy way of listening and of keeping up with any news and information around this podcast. Please visit stitcherystories.com. Of course, you can listen to Stitchery Stories on plenty of podcast apps at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and plenty more besides. You can also ask your smart speaker to play Stitchery Stories podcast too. But wherever you listen, why not leave us a rating and a review to encourage other people to listen too? I very much appreciate you taking the time to do that for me. So that is the end of our Stitchery story for today. Keep stitching, keep smiling, and keep creating your very own Stitchery Stories.